The stagecoach lurched to a stop at the edge of Ash Creek just as the sun began its descent behind the mesa. Dust swirled around the wooden wheels, settling slowly in the windless evening. Nora Bellamy gripped her medical case tighter as she stepped down, her boots finding purchase on the hard-packed earth. 24 years old, trained by church nurses and a traveling physician. She carried everything she owned in 2 cases, one filled with carbolic acid, needles, thread, and bandages, the other with her few dresses and a leather-bound patient log. The driver tossed her trunk down with little ceremony. "That's the old storage shed yonder," he said, pointing to a weathered building at the town's edge. Previous Doc left it empty when the fever took him last spring. Nora nodded, adjusting her plain cotton bonnet. The shed would do. She'd scrubbed worse places clean. As the stagecoach rattled away toward the main street, she surveyed her new home. Ash Creek sprawled before her, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that seemed to grow from the desert itself, surrounded by scrub brush and distant mountains. She had barely set her cases on the dusty ground when she heard the horse approaching. The rider came fast, too fast for casual business, and Nora instinctively checked that her medical supplies were within reach. The man who dismounted was tall, lean from hard work rather than hunger. His face bore the permanent squint of someone who spent long days under the desert sun. Dark hair showed beneath his worn hat, and his clothes spoke of function over fashion canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest. But it was what he carried that made Nora's breath catch. A boy, perhaps 10 years old, lay limp in his arms. The child's skin burned with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid, mestizo features. Nora noted automatically the mixed heritage common in these borderlands. But what made her jaw clench was the rough wooden board tied to the boy's back with fraying rope. Someone had carved crude letters into it. "Quarantine unclean." "Ma'am," the man said, his voice steady despite the urgency in his movements. "Name's Elias Hart. Got a ranch 5 miles north. This boy Miguel, his mother works my kitchen garden. Found him like this in their quarters. The town folk." He didn't finish, but the board said enough. Nora stepped forward without hesitation, pressing her palm to the child's forehead. Burning hot, but not the dry heat of desert exposure. This was infection. "Bring him inside," she ordered, already pushing open the shed door. The interior was dusty but structurally sound. A wooden table, some shelves, a cot in the corner. It would serve. Nora set down her medical case and immediately began pulling out supplies. "Put him on the table, carefully." Elias obeyed, his hands surprisingly gentle as he laid Miguel down. Nora took her scissors and cut the ropes holding the shameful sign, tossing it into the corner with more force than necessary. "Hold the lamp," she instructed, lighting the oil lantern hanging from a beam. "I need to see." As golden light filled the space, she began her examination. The boy's neck showed swollen lymph nodes, but not the blackening of plague. She checked his armpits, groin swollen there too, but the skin remained unbroken. When she pressed gently on his abdomen, he moaned but didn't wake. "It's not plague," she said firmly. "Likely a severe infection from an untreated wound. See here?" She indicated a festering cut on the boy's leg, red streaks radiating upward. "This needs immediate attention." Without waiting for response, Nora rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She poured water from her canteen into a basin, added carbolic acid, and began scrubbing her hands. The sharp chemical smell filled the shed. Elias watched, holding the lamp steady as she requested. "I need boiled water," she said. "There's a pot in my trunk. Can you start a fire outside?" He moved efficiently, and soon she had what she needed. Nora cleaned the wound thoroughly, ignoring the boy's weak cries. The infection had burrowed deep, but not beyond help. She took her scalpel, sterilized it in the flame, and began the delicate work of draining the abscess. "Hold his shoulders," she murmured, gently but firm. Elias's hands were steady, calloused from ranch work but careful with the child. Nora appreciated that he didn't flinch at the sight of pus and blood, didn't question her methods. She irrigated the wound with the boiled water, applied carbolic solution, and began suturing with precise stitches. As she worked, she heard voices outside. Footsteps approached the shed, and shadows fell across the doorway. 2 men stood silhouetted against the dying light, one broad and well-dressed, the other wearing a deputy star. Heard the new nurse was harboring diseased folk. The broader man said. His voice carried the authority of wealth and habit of being obeyed. That's Thaddeus Pike, Elias said quietly. Owns the biggest ranch in the valley. The deputy, a narrow-faced man with pale eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Macklin Dorsey. We've got quarantine procedures in this town. That boy is my patient, Nora interrupted, not looking up from her stitching. And he has a wound infection, not plague. I'd appreciate if you'd step back. You're blocking my light. Pike's face darkened. Now see here, Miss Bellamy, Nurse Bellamy. And unless you have medical training, sir, I'll ask you to let me work. The 2 men exchanged glances. Pike's jaw worked like he was chewing bitter root. That boy's from the Mexican quarters. His kind brings disease. Infection doesn't choose by heritage, Nora said sharply. It chooses by opportunity. This child had an untreated wound that festered, nothing more, nothing less. She finished the last stitch, tied it off, and began applying clean bandages. Miguel's breathing had already steadied, the fever beginning to break now that the source of infection was addressed. You're making a mistake, Pike said finally. This town has ways of dealing with those who don't respect proper boundaries. Then I suppose I'll learn them, Nora replied, finally meeting his gaze. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to monitor my patient's temperature. The men left, but their presence lingered like smoke. Elias helped her move Miguel to the cot, where she covered him with a clean blanket from her supplies. You've made an enemy, Elias observed, his voice neutral. I've made several, I imagine. Nora checked Miguel's pulse, noting the time in her log. It won't be the first time. Pike's not a man to cross lightly. Neither is Dorsey when Pike's pulling his strings. Nora looked up at him then, really seeing him for the first time since the crisis had passed. His eyes were gray, steady, concerned, but not fearful. And yet you brought the boy here. Couldn't leave him to die because folks are scared and stupid. She almost smiled. No, I suppose you couldn't. She turned back to Miguel, adjusting his blanket. He'll need watching through the night. I'll stay with him. I'll bring some supplies from my wagon. Elias said, Coffee, firewood. You'll need both before morning. After he left, Nora sat in the lamplight, watching her young patient breathe. She'd been in Ash Creek less than an hour and had already challenged the town's prejudices. The quarantine board lay in the corner where she'd thrown it, a crude reminder of the fear that gripped frontier communities. She opened her patient log and began to write in her neat script. Day 1 Ash Creek, patient Miguel, approximately 10 years old, presenting with fever and infected laceration to left anterior tibial region. Outside, she heard Elias's wagon returning. Through the window, she could see curious faces peering from the main street, some hostile, some merely wary. Word traveled fast in small towns. Let them talk, she thought. She'd come here to heal, not to appease. The boy on the cot stirred, mumbling in Spanish. She placed a cool cloth on his forehead and continued her notes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had a patient to tend. The shed that would become her clinic smelled of carbolic and lamp oil, of fresh bandages and the lingering dust of abandonment. But beneath it all was the scent of purpose renewed. Nora Bellamy had found her place on the frontier, contentious though it might be. As Elias brought in the promised supplies, setting them quietly by the door, she noticed how he moved through the space without disturbing her work. A man used to sick rooms, perhaps. There was a story there, but it would keep. For now, she had enough battles to fight. The stars emerged in the desert sky, brilliant and uncaring. Inside the shed, two strangers kept vigil over a sick child, while the town of Ash Creek wrestled with the arrival of a woman who refused to honor their unspoken rules. It was, Nora reflected as she checked Miguel's temperature again, an appropriately dramatic beginning to her frontier practice. The boarding house room was barely larger than a horse stall, but it was clean and private. Nora sat at the small wooden table, her patient log open before her, writing by the light of a single candle. The pen scratched steadily across the page as she recorded the day's treatments, Miguel's continued recovery, 2 cowboys with cuts from barbed wire, a pregnant woman seeking herbs for morning sickness. 3 days in Ash Creek, and already her makeshift clinic had seen a steady stream of patients, those brave enough to defy the whispers, at least. She paused, pen hovering over the page. In the margin, she'd unconsciously drawn a small cross, a habit from her training days at St. Mary's. The symbol brought back memories she'd rather leave buried James's face, pale with yellow fever, his hand growing cold in hers as she prayed uselessly by his bedside. The promise she'd made afterward, kneeling in the empty chapel. I'll never belong to another. My life for your work. Lord, my hands for healing. Nothing more. Asterisk. The vow had seemed noble then, a fitting memorial to her lost betrothed. Now, 3 years later, it felt like armor she couldn't remove, even when it chafed. A knock interrupted her thoughts, soft, hesitant. "It's open," she called, not looking up. Elias Hart stepped inside, removing his hat. He carried a basket covered with cloth. "Evening, Miss Bellamy. Thought you might have missed supper again." She had, but admitting it seemed like weakness. "I eat when I can." Figured as much. He set the basket on the table's edge, careful not to disturb her papers. Maria Miguel's mother, she made extra, said it was the least she could do. The cloth lifted to reveal still warm tortillas, beans seasoned with peppers, and a small jar of fresh milk. Nora's stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. "Please thank her for me," she said, setting down her pen. Elias didn't leave immediately. Instead, he glanced at her hands, noting the red raw patches where lye soap and carbolic had eaten at the skin. "You'll need salve for those." "I have some, but you won't use it." It wasn't a question. Too busy tending others to tend yourself. She looked up then, meeting his steady gray gaze. "I'm quite capable of managing my own care. Mr. Hart." "Never said you weren't." He pulled a small tin from his vest pocket, set it beside the basket. "Juniper and beeswax. My mother's recipe works better than store-bought." Before she could protest, he'd moved to the window, looking out at the darkened street. "Miguel asked for you today. First real words he's spoken since the fever broke." His mother wept. "He's a strong boy." "He is." Elias turned back to her. "Doc Winters, the man who had your clinic before he wouldn't have treated Miguel, would have honored that quarantine sign. Let the boy die." Then Doc Winters was a fool. Maybe, but he lived comfortable here for 10 years. Never had his supplies burned. Never had threats painted on his door. Nora's jaw tightened. "If you're trying to frighten me, I'm trying to prepare you." His voice remained calm, thoughtful. "Pike's been talking, saying you're disrupting the natural order, bringing disease into decent folks' homes. Dorsey's been making rounds, suggesting people might want to seek medical care elsewhere." "There is no elsewhere. The nearest doctor is 50 miles away." "That's what Pike's counting on." She stood abruptly, moving to the wash basin. The water was cold as she splashed it on her face, trying to cool the anger building in her chest. "I took an oath, Mr. Hart, to heal the sick, tend the injured. It said nothing about checking their pedigree first." "No, I don't suppose it did." Something in his tone made her turn. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, respect mixed with something else. Concern or something deeper. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You could have taken Miguel to die quietly, kept your ranch out of Pike's sights." Elias considered the question, turning his hat in his hands. "My wife died 4 years ago. Childbirth fever. Doc Winters was too drunk to come. Said it was just women's troubles. By the time I found a midwife, it was too late." The words hung between them, stark and honest. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "Point is, I know what it costs when healing comes with conditions attached, when help depends on who you are instead of what you need." He moved toward the door. "So no, Miss Bellamy. I won't counsel you to bend to Pike's way of thinking. Just want you to know what you're standing against." After he left, Nora sat back at her table but couldn't concentrate on her notes. She opened the tin he'd left. The salve smelled of pine forests and honey. Despite herself, she rubbed a small amount into her chapped hands. The relief was immediate. Outside her window, Ash Creek slept fitfully. Dogs barked in the distance, and somewhere a guitar played a mournful Spanish melody. She thought of the women she'd trained with at St. Mary's, safe in their eastern hospitals with proper supplies and respectful patients. They'd been horrified when she announced her intention to go west. "But Nora, you're still in mourning, and to go alone, unwed, it's not proper." Asterisk. Proper, as if propriety had ever healed a fever or set a broken bone. She closed her patient log and prepared for bed, changing into her nightgown behind the dressing screen. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself, pale skin that rarely saw sun, dark hair always severely pinned, features that James had once called handsome rather than pretty. She was 24, neither old nor young, suspended in the peculiar limbo of spinsterhood by choice rather than circumstance. The vow she'd made felt heavier tonight, not because she wished to break it. She didn't yearn for romance or marriage, but because she was beginning to realize how it isolated her, set her apart even more than her profession already did. In the East, she'd been a curiosity. Here, she was something more dangerous, a woman alone who didn't seem to need anyone. But that wasn't quite true. Was it tonight? She'd needed that knock on the door, that basket of food. She'd needed someone to acknowledge that her hands hurt, that her work mattered. She blew out the candle and lay in the narrow bed, listening to the night sounds. Tomorrow, she'd check on Miguel, treat whoever came to her door, and continue building her practice one patient at a time. She'd face Pike's hostility and Dorsey's threats with the same calm composure she brought to surgery. But tonight, in the darkness, she allowed herself one small admission when Elias Hart had noticed her raw hands, when he'd brought salve without being asked. Something inside her chest had shifted. Not her vow that remained solid as stone, but perhaps the walls she'd built around it had developed the tiniest crack. She turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket higher. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. Somewhere in town, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. Life persisted, messy and miraculous, requiring tending hands and steady hearts. Nora closed her eyes and dreamed not of James or yellow fever or promises made in grief, but of juniper salve and gray eyes that saw too much. When she woke at dawn, she dressed quickly, pinned her hair severely, and prepared to face another day. The crack in her walls remained, small but persistent, like the first fissure in winter ice that promises spring. The red X painted across her clinic door was still wet when Nora arrived that morning. Below it, in blocky letters, "Not licensed to practice. Closed by order." Deputy Dorsey's signature sprawled at the bottom, but the shadow of Thaddeus Pike lurked in every brushstroke. Nora set down her medical bag and examined the notice. The paint had dripped, creating crimson tears down the weathered wood. She'd seen such marks before on houses during plague years, on businesses run by undesirables. The message was clear: submit or suffer. She took a knife from her bag and began scraping at the paint, methodical strokes that sent red flakes spinning to the ground. A small crowd gathered across the street, watching. "That's official county business you're defacing," Dorsey called out, sauntering over with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "This is vandalism of private property," Nora replied, continuing to scrape. "I rent this building from Mr. Jameson. Unless you have a court order which would require an actual judge and actual charges, you're the one breaking the law." Dorsey's face flushed. "Pike says—" "Mr. Pike isn't an elected official." She turned to face him fully. "Neither is he a medical licensing board, a judge, or anyone with legal authority over my practice." "You're stirring up trouble. Woman. Treating their kind." He jerked his head toward the Mexican quarter. "Bringing their filth into town." "I'm treating human beings with medical needs." She resumed scraping. "If that disturbs Mr. Pike's breakfast, perhaps he should eat elsewhere." By noon, she'd removed most of the paint and reopened her doors. Patients trickled in slowly, a child with croup, an old man with rheumatism. But she noticed the division. Those who brought vegetables or eggs in trade came through the back door now, while the bolder ones still used the front. At the general store, the split was even more apparent. Mrs. Holbrook, the baker's wife, actually stepped aside when Nora approached the counter, clutching her parcels as if disease might leap from the nurse's skirts. "Need supplies," Nora told Clement, the shopkeeper. "Carbolic acid, cotton wool, laudanum if you have it." Clement glanced nervously at the other customers. "Credit's no good here anymore. Miss Bellamy, cash only." "My credit was fine yesterday." "That was before." He stopped, but his meaning was clear. Before Pike spread his poison. Nora paid in coins, aware of the whispers behind her. As she gathered her supplies, old doctor Holcomb shuffled in. She'd heard about him, the town's previous physician, now a whiskey-soaked shadow who spent more time in the saloon than seeing patients. Well, he slurred, breath reeking of alcohol even at midday. "The lady nurse who thinks she knows better than everyone." He swayed closer. "You know what your problem is? You don't understand the natural order. Some folks are meant to die, especially the brown ones. Keeps the population balanced." "Step aside, Dr. Holcomb." "Doctor!" He laughed bitterly. "Least I got proper training, not like some church girl playing with bandages." "Your proper training didn't help Mrs. Hart 4 years ago," Nora said quietly. "Or the Martinez twins last winter, or Sarah Coleman's baby." His face purpled. "You uppity." "That's enough." Elias Hart's voice cut through the store. He stood in the doorway, hat shading his eyes. "Doc, think you're needed at the saloon. Heard McCready's buying rounds." Holcomb muttered something vile, but shambled out. The store remained silent, tension thick as summer dust. "Miss Bellamy," Elias said, touching his hat brim. "Might I walk you back?" She wanted to refuse, to show she needed no protection. But something in his stance, not threatening, just quietly present, made her nod. Outside, Main Street buzzed with its usual activity, but Nora felt the stares, heard the whispers that stopped as they passed. At the clinic, they found a small bundle on the doorstep, fresh bread wrapped in cloth, no note attached. "The widow Martinez," Elias identified. "Her grandson Jose broke his arm last year. Holcomb wanted to amputate. You set it straight." "I remember." Nora picked up the bundle, inhaling the yeasty warmth. "She shouldn't risk Pike's anger for me." Maybe she figures some things are worth the risk. Inside the clinic, Nora busied herself organizing the new supplies while Elias stood by the window, a casual sentry. "You don't have to guard me," she said. "Not guarding, waiting." "For what?" "My turn." She looked up to find him rolling up his sleeve, revealing a long gash on his forearm, poorly wrapped with dirty cloth. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday." "Barbed wire." "And you're just now seeking treatment." She guided him to the examination table. Men, you'd let your arm rot off before admitting you need help. Didn't want to add to your troubles? She unwrapped the wound, noting with relief that infection hadn't set in yet. As she cleaned it, she was aware of his steady breathing, the way he didn't flinch even when she applied carbolic. This is deep. You'll need stitches. Figured as much. She prepared her needle. Conscious of their proximity, he smelled of leather and horse, honest sweat and desert sage. When she bent close to work, she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Hold still, she murmured, beginning the first stitch. You know Pike's planning something, he said quietly. Man like him doesn't take defiance well, especially from a woman. Let him plan. Nora, he caught himself. Miss Bellamy, this isn't just about medicine anymore. It's about power, control. Pike's been working to push out the Mexican families, buy their land cheap. Your clinic gives them hope, makes them harder to move. She tied off a stitch, started another. All the more reason to stay. All the more reason to be careful. Their eyes met briefly before she returned to her work. 6 stitches, neat and precise. She wrapped the wound with clean bandages, trying not to notice the strength in his arm, the calluses that spoke of honest labor. There, keep it clean and dry. Come back in a week to remove the stitches. He rolled down his sleeve. What do I owe you? Nothing. You've brought me supplies, watched my back. We're even. Don't think that's how it works. It's how it works in my clinic. He stood, reaching for his hat, then paused. That woman you're treating tomorrow, Standing Dove, be extra careful. She's Chief Broken Wing's daughter. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. You can't promise that. No, she admitted, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to help her. He nodded slowly. That's what worries me. Your everything might be more than this town can swallow. After he left, Nora sat at her desk, making notes about his treatment. Outside, she heard horses, angry voices. Through the window, she saw Pike talking to a group of men, gesturing toward her clinic, planning, just as Elias warned. She thought of the vow she'd made, the life she'd chosen. It had seemed simple, then serve God by serving others. But here on the frontier, nothing was simple. Every act of healing was a political statement, every patient a potential battleground. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A young native woman stood at the back door, a shawl hiding her swollen belly. Standing Dove. Come early. Please, the woman said in accented English. Baby comes wrong. Medicine man tried, but... She touched her stomach, fear etched in every line of her face. Nora brought her inside quickly, aware that treating the chief's daughter would escalate tensions further. But as she examined the young woman, feeling the baby's position, all political considerations fell away. There was only the immediate need: a child turned breech, a mother in distress. We can fix this, Nora said firmly. But it won't be easy. As she prepared for the difficult procedure ahead, she heard more horses outside, more angry voices. The storm was building, just as Elias predicted. But inside her clinic, there was only the ancient rhythm of birth struggling to complete itself, and her hands working to make it possible. Whatever came next, she would face it. The red X on her door was gone, but its message lingered: conform or suffer the consequences. Nora chose neither. She chose to heal. Deputy Dorsey's boots struck the clinic floor with deliberate force. Each step meant to intimidate. He carried a rolled document like a weapon, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Behind him, 2 of Pike's ranch hands lingered in the doorway, blocking the morning light. Official warrant, Dorsey announced, unrolling the paper with theatrical flair. Charges of practicing medicine without proper territorial licensing, resulting in the death of one William Pike, Jr. Nora's hand stilled on the bandage she was rolling. William Pike died 3 days ago from a knife wound to the belly. I never treated him. Says here you did. Dorsey tapped the paper. Night of the 15th. Failed to properly clean the wound, leading to blood poisoning. I was here all night on the 15th, delivering Standing Dove's baby. Half the tribal council witnessed it. Indians don't count as witnesses. His smile was sharp as broken glass. You've got two choices. Come quiet for a proper trial in the county seat, or resist and make things harder. Nora read the warrant carefully. The seal looked official enough, though the ink was suspiciously fresh. The judge's signature was an illegible scrawl that could have been anyone's. This claims I treated William Pike at his ranch, she said slowly. I've never set foot on Pike property. Got witnesses say different. The door opened wider, and Elias Hart entered, moving with the controlled calm of a man walking into a saloon fight. Morning, Deputy. Heard there was some confusion about Miss Bellamy's whereabouts on the 15th. No confusion, Dorsey snapped. Got a sworn statement. From who? Because I've got something better. Elias pulled out a creased receipt. Supply list from Murphy's store, dated the 15th. Shows Miss Bellamy purchasing medical supplies at near midnight. Tom Murphy will swear to it. Hard to be in two places at once. Dorsey's face reddened. Are you calling Mr. Pike a liar? I'm saying memories can be faulty when grief's involved. Elias's tone remained even. Maybe someone else treated William. Doc Holcomb was seen riding that direction. Holcomb was drunk at Sally's. When isn't he doesn't mean he didn't make a house call after. The deputy's hand moved toward his pistol. You're interfering with the law. Hart! No, I'm clarifying facts. Unless Pike's got proof Miss Bellamy was at his ranch, real proof. Not just his word, this warrant's based on false charges. A crowd had gathered outside. Drawn by the confrontation, Nora recognized faces from both camps, those who supported her and those who wanted her gone. The tension stretched taut as fence wire. I'll come to the sheriff's office, Nora said suddenly. Both men turned to her in surprise. Not under arrest, but to present my case directly. I have my patient log from that night, witnesses who can attest to my whereabouts. Nora Miss Bellamy, Elias warned. That's not wise. Neither is hiding. She gathered her logbook, the receipt Elias had produced, and her medical bag. Deputy Dorsey, I assume you'll guarantee my safety. Dorsey looked uncertain now. His prepared script disrupted. Don't need guarantees if you're innocent. Nevertheless, I'd like your word, in front of these witnesses. Trapped by the crowd's attention, Dorsey nodded grudgingly. No harm will come to you at the sheriff's office. The walk through town felt like a funeral procession. Nora kept her head high, aware of the whispers, the stares. Some women pulled their children inside as she passed. Others nodded quietly. Small gestures of support. At the sheriff's office, a surprise waited. Judge Coleman from the county seat sat behind the desk, his traveling clothes dusty from the road. An honest man, by reputation, not in Pike's pocket. Heard there was some irregularity in warrant procedures, the judge said dryly. Thought I'd investigate personally. Pike himself stood by the window, his bulk blocking the light. My boy's dead because of this woman's incompetence. Your boy's dead because he got into a knife fight over cards, Judge Coleman corrected. Have the witness statements right here. 3 men saw the fight. Saw William ride off clutching his belly. Question is, who treated him after? She did, Pike insisted. Came to the ranch, botched the job. Then explain this. Nora opened her log to the relevant page. Every patient I've treated, with times and procedures. The 15th shows Standing Dove's delivery, starting at 8 in the evening. Complicated breech birth lasting until past midnight. You could have written that any time, Pike snarled. The ink's been dry for days. Different color than today's entries. Any chemist could verify that. Judge Coleman examined the log. Then the receipt Elias had provided. Tom Murphy's already confirmed the late-night purchase. Hard to argue with. Then who treated my boy? Pike's voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion he'd shown. I'd guess Doc Holcomb, Nora said quietly. He has a history of attempting surgery while intoxicated. Check his instruments for blood, his clothes. The evidence will be there. Holcomb's missing, Dorsey admitted reluctantly. Left town yesterday. Convenient, Elias murmured. Judge Coleman stood. Without credible evidence placing Miss Bellamy at the scene, this warrants invalid deputy. I'm disappointed in your eagerness to act on unsubstantiated claims. Pike's face purpled. You're making a mistake. Judge, this woman's a menace, treating Indians and Mexicans, spreading their diseases. Last I checked, disease doesn't respect borders or bloodlines. The judge interrupted. Miss Bellamy, you're free to go. And Mr. Pike, false accusations are a serious matter. I'd think carefully before making any more. Outside, Nora's knees nearly buckled with relief. Elias steadied her with a hand on her elbow, guiding her away from the building. That was risky, he said. If Coleman hadn't shown up. But he did. She drew a shaky breath. Though I doubt this is over. No, Pike's not used to losing. They walked in silence until they reached the clinic. Evidence of the morning's drama lingered, boot prints in the dust, anxious faces peering from windows. Why the receipt? She asked suddenly. How did you know to save it? Elias looked uncomfortable. Been keeping track, just in case. Of my purchases. Of your whereabouts. When I can. He met her gaze directly. This town's got an ugly streak. Figured someone should be watching your back. The intimacy of that admission that he'd been quietly protecting her made something flutter in her chest. I don't need a guardian, Mr. Hart. Never said you did, but even the strongest folks need allies. Inside the clinic, they found Maria waiting with fresh bandages she'd boiled and dried. Heard the trouble? She said simply. Came to help. As the afternoon wore on, more supporters arrived. The widow Martinez brought soup. The railroad workers whose injuries Nora had treated stood guard outside, making their presence known. Even some of the townswomen appeared, leaving small gifts of food or supplies. Look at that, Elias said softly, watching from the window. Pike wanted to isolate you. Instead, he's shown folks where they stand. But Nora noticed who wasn't there: the established families. The business owners, those with the most to lose from Pike's displeasure. The battle lines were drawn now, clear as the desert horizon. As evening approached, Elias prepared to leave. I'll be close tonight. My men too, just in case Pike decides the legal route isn't working. You think he'd resort to violence? I think a man who'd forged charges wouldn't hesitate to forge evidence. Or worse. He paused at the door. You could leave, you know. Other towns need doctors. And abandon these people, the ones who risked Pike's anger to support me. Figured you'd say that. Something almost like a smile touched his lips. You're a stubborn woman. Nora Bellamy. So I've been told. After he left, she sat in the gathering darkness, tallying the day's events. She'd won this skirmish, but the war was far from over. Pike wouldn't forget this humiliation, wouldn't forgive her defiance. But for tonight, she was still here, still healing, still keeping the promise she'd made, even as that promise grew more complicated with each passing day. Through the window, she saw Elias's men taking positions around the clinic, quiet shadows ensuring her safety. The gesture should have rankled her independent spirit. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. Perhaps stubbornness wasn't the only trait they shared. Perhaps loyalty ran just as deep. The smell of smoke woke her. Acrid. Chemical, not the clean scent of cooking fires, but something darker. Nora bolted upright in her boarding house bed, instantly alert. Through the window, an orange glow painted the pre-dawn sky. The clinic. She threw on her dress, not bothering with proper lacing, grabbed her medical bag from habit, and ran. Her bare feet struck the cold dirt street as she rounded the corner. Flames engulfed the shed that had become her sanctuary. her battlefield. The fire crackled and roared, already consuming the roof. No! The word tore from her throat as she rushed forward. Her medicines, her instruments, her patient records, months of careful documentation. All burning. Get back! Strong arms caught her around the waist, pulling her away from the inferno. Elias. His shirt was already singed, his face streaked with soot. My supplies, the carbolic, the surgical kit. She struggled against his hold, desperate to salvage something, anything. It's too late. The roof's about to... A tremendous crack split the air as the main beam gave way. The roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Nora went limp in Elias's arms, the fight draining out of her as she watched her life's work turn to ash. But instinct kicked in. The medicine chest, she'd left it near the door after treating a late patient. Without thinking, she twisted free of Elias's grip and darted toward the burning building. Nora, don't! The heat hit her like a physical blow. Smoke filled her lungs, making her eyes stream. She dropped to her knees, crawling beneath the worst of the smoke, feeling along the floor. Her hand struck wood the chest. She grabbed it, turned to retreat, but the doorway was a wall of flame now. Then Elias was there, throwing a wet blanket over her, half carrying, half dragging her through the fire. They burst into the cool night air, both coughing, gasping. He didn't release her until they were well clear of the building, and even then, his arms remained around her as she shook. You fool woman, he said roughly, his voice raw with smoke and something else. You beautiful, stubborn fool. For the first time since coming to Ash Creek, Nora's composure cracked completely. She trembled against him, clutching the salvaged medicine chest, her carefully maintained walls crumbling like the clinic behind them. Everything's gone. Everything I built. Not everything. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, holding her steady. You're alive. That's what matters. The townspeople were gathering now, some forming a bucket brigade, though it was clearly too late. In the flickering light, Nora saw faces both sympathetic and satisfied. Pike stood at the edge of the crowd, still in his nightshirt, his expression unreadable. Shame about the fire, he said loudly. These old buildings, so much dry wood, could have started from anything. Knocked over lamp, maybe, or kerosene poured deliberate-like. One of Elias's ranch hands countered, holding up a charred can. Found this roundback. Sheriff Morrison, Coleman's temporary replacement, took the can without enthusiasm. Could be anyone's. Lots of folks use kerosene. The politics of it all, the careful dance of accusation and denial, made Nora sick. She pulled away from Elias, standing on her own though her legs shook. I need to check the medicines, see what survived. You need to get that hand tended. She looked down, surprised to see blood seeping through a tear in her palm where she'd gripped something sharp. The pain hadn't registered yet, lost in the larger ache of destruction. Come on, Elias said quietly. My ranch. You can clean up there. Figure out next steps. I can't leave. People will need... What people need is you alive and whole. His tone brooked no argument. Jake, bring the wagon around. The ride to Hart Ranch passed in a blur. Nora sat rigid beside Elias, the salvaged medicine chest in her lap, watching the smoke pillar rise behind them. Everything she'd worked for, reduced to a smudge against the dawn sky. The ranch house was simple but solid adobe walls, timber beams, everything speaking of practical comfort. Elias led her to the kitchen, lit lamps, pumped water into a basin. Let me see that hand. She extended it numbly. The cut ran deep across her palm, full of soot and splinters. As he cleaned it with gentle efficiency, she found herself studying his face. Lines of worry creased his brow, and there was a redness to his eyes that wasn't just from smoke. You were watching the clinic, she said. That's how you got there so fast. I had a feeling Pike might try something after yesterday. He picked out a splinter with tweezers. Wasn't fast enough. You pulled me out of a burning building. I'd say that was fast enough. Their eyes met across the small distance. His hands stilled on hers, and for a moment, the careful space they'd maintained between them collapsed like the clinic's roof. She could see the fear in his eyes, not of the fire, but of what might have happened if he'd been a moment later. "When I saw you run in there," he said roughly, "I thought—" He shook his head, returning to his task. "You scared 10 years off my life. I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You'd do it again for those medicines." She almost smiled. "Probably." He finished cleaning the wound, applied salve, his mother's recipe. She recognized the scent and began wrapping it with clean cloth. His movements were careful, almost tender. "This changes things," she said quietly. "Without a clinic, without supplies." "We'll rebuild. With what I spent everything I had on those supplies, and Pike won't stop. He'll burn the next one too. Then we build it stronger. Adobe instead of wood, maybe on my land, where I can protect it better." The offer hung between them, heavy with implication. A clinic on his ranch would tie them together in ways that went beyond medical care and protection. It would be a declaration of alliance that the whole town would recognize. "I can't ask that of you," she said. "You've already risked enough." "You're not asking, I'm offering." He tied off the bandage, but didn't release her hand. "Nora, you need to understand something. This isn't just about you anymore. Miguel's walking because of you. Standing Dove's baby lives because of you. Every person you've healed, they're not going to let Pike drive you off. He just burned down my clinic. And folks saw him watching while it burned. They're not stupid. They know what this was." His thumb brushed across her wrist, perhaps unconsciously. "Question is, are you stubborn enough to stay and fight, or will you let him win?" The challenge sparked something in her anger. Determination, the iron will that had carried her this far. "You know the answer to that." "Thought I might." This time, he did smile, just slightly. "There's a room upstairs. Was my sister's before she married. You can stay there while we sort this out." "Elias?" She used his given name without thinking, then caught herself. "Mr. Hart, people will talk." "Let them. My foreman's wife is here days, and her daughter, all proper enough for even the gossips." He finally released her hand. "Besides, after tonight, I think we're past some of the formalities." She thought of those moments by the fire, his arms around her walls crumbling, the raw fear in his voice. Yes, something had shifted between them, some careful distance breached by crisis. "All right," she said, "but only until I can make other arrangements." He showed her to the room, clean, simple, with a narrow bed and washstand. Dawn light crept through the window, revealing the smoke still rising from town. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "We'll face the rest when you're ready." After he left, Nora sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the night's events. Her clinic was gone, her carefully maintained independence, compromised. The walls she'd built around her heart, cracked and threatening to crumble entirely. She thought of her vow, made in grief and certainty 3 years ago. It had seemed so clear then, a life devoted to healing, free from the complications of attachment. But here, in this simple room that smelled faintly of lavender and leather, with her hand bandaged by someone who'd risked his life for hers, that certainty felt as fragile as smoke. Through the window, she could see Elias talking to his men, organizing something, guards, probably, protection for her and for whatever came next. The sight of him steady, determined, quietly commanding made something flutter beneath her breastbone. Not love, she wouldn't call it that, but perhaps something equally dangerous, trust, the beginning of belonging. She lay back on the narrow bed, still clutching the salvaged medicine chest. Tomorrow, she would rise and fight. She would rebuild, resist, heal despite Pike's best efforts to stop her. But tonight, for just a few hours, She would allow herself this safety in the home of someone who'd proven himself willing to walk through fire for her. It was more than she'd allowed herself in 3 years. It was, perhaps, the beginning of allowing herself to truly live again. The dust storm hit just after noon, turning the sky yellow-brown and filling the air with stinging grit. They'd been traveling since dawn. Nora, Elias, and 6 of his most trusted hands, moving a small group of vulnerable patients toward an old line shack in the canyon. Word had spread that Dorsey was forming a posse, that Pike wanted the disease-spreading nurse brought in for the clinic fire. "Keep your heads down and mouths covered," Elias shouted over the howling wind. Pulling his bandana up, the horses struggled against the gusts, and visibility dropped to mere yards. Nora squinted through the brown haze, one arm protecting the young mother clutching her fevered infant beside her in the wagon. Behind them, old Samuel wheezed despite the cloth over his face, his consumption made worse by the dust. These were the patients who couldn't defend themselves, who'd be easy targets for Pike's manufactured justice. The storm intensified, sand scouring exposed skin like tiny needles. The wagon lurched over unseen rocks, throwing Nora against the sideboard. She bit back a cry, her injured hand throbbing where she'd gripped too hard. Then she heard a sound that cut through even the wind's roar. Hoofbeats, many of them. "Riders coming," Jake called out, barely audible. Elias wheeled his horse around, rifle already in hand. Through the swirling dust, shadows materialized 8 men, maybe more, bandanas hiding their faces, not quite brave enough to show themselves, but bold enough to hunt in the storm. "That's far enough," one called out. Dorsey's voice. "Got warrants for the woman. Hand her over peaceful-like." "Can't hear you over this wind," Elias replied, his rifle casual but ready. "Best turn back before someone gets lost in this storm." The tension stretched taut as the wind howled between the two groups. Nora felt for the pistol Elias had insisted she carry, her unpracticed fingers clumsy on the grip. Beside her, the mother whimpered, clutching her baby tighter. Then the world exploded into chaos. Someone fired impossible to say who in the brown confusion. Horses reared, men shouted, and the storm swallowed everything in its hungry maw. "Go!" Elias roared. "Jake, get them to the shack!" The wagon lurched forward as Jake whipped the horses into motion. Nora threw her body over the mother and child as more shots rang out. Prayers and curses mixing with the wind. She couldn't see Elias anymore. Couldn't see anything but brown fury and wheeling shadows. The ride became a nightmare of jolting motion and sand-filled lungs. Nora's world narrowed to keeping her patients protected, to breathing through the cloth over her face, to staying conscious despite the battering. Time lost meaning in the storm's belly. When they finally reached the line shack, a low stone building tucked against the canyon wall, Nora's legs barely held her. She helped her patients inside, grateful for the relative shelter, then turned to peer back into the storm. "Where's Elias?" she asked Jake, who was securing the horses. "He'll come. Man knows this land like his own heartbeat." But minutes stretched long, and he didn't appear. Nora paced the small space, her composure cracking with each moment. The baby's fever needed tending. Samuel's breathing grew more labored, but she couldn't focus, couldn't think beyond the image of Elias somewhere in that hellish storm. When he finally stumbled through the door, she moved without thinking. Her hands mapped his face, his shoulders, checking for wounds even as sand fell from his clothes in small cascades. "I'm all right," he said, catching her wrists gently. "They turned back when the storm got worse. Dorsey's no fool, he won't risk his men for Pike's vendetta." Relief hit her like a physical blow. She swayed, and suddenly she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath the dust-covered shirt. The careful distance she'd maintained. The walls she'd rebuilt after the fire, all of it crumbled like sand castles before a tide. "I thought," her voice broke, "when you didn't come." "Shh." His arms tightened around her. "I'm here. We're safe." She pulled back enough to see his face. and something in his expression made her breath catch. The storm had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw truth between them. "Nora," he said quietly, "there's something I need to say. Something that's been—" A violent coughing fit from Samuel shattered the moment. Nora's training kicked in, and she moved to tend her patient, but the awareness lingered of Elias's eyes on her, of words unspoken, of a line almost crossed. The storm raged for hours. Nora worked by lamplight, bringing down the baby's fever with cool compresses, easing Samuel's breathing with steam from boiled sage. The mother Rosa helped when she could, her quiet strength a reminder of why this work mattered. As night fell and the wind finally began to calm, Elias sat beside her where she rested against the wall. They didn't speak for a long moment, just sat in companionable exhaustion. "This can't continue," she said finally. "Running, hiding, it's not fair to them." She gestured to her sleeping patients. "No, it's not." He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers. "But neither is you hanging for a fire you didn't set. I won't abandon them." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "There might be another way. Judge Coleman's still in the area. If we could present evidence. Witnesses. What witnesses? Everyone's too scared of Pike to speak publicly. Maybe, maybe not. You've touched a lot of lives here. Nora, saved children, delivered babies, mended bones. Those kinds of debts. They matter to people." She turned to look at him in the lamplight. Dust still clung to the lines around his eyes, and there was a weariness there that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Why do you keep fighting for me? You could walk away from this, protect your ranch, your men." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "You really don't know." The air between them grew charged, like the storm had moved inside. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as he reached up, his thumb gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "That night my wife died," he said softly. "I made my own vow. Told myself I'd never let anyone matter that much again. Never give God another chance to tear my heart out." His hand dropped. "Then you showed up with your medical bag and your stubborn streak, treating folks others wouldn't touch, making me remember what it felt like to admire someone, to want to protect something good in this hard world." "Elias." "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I know you've got your own promises to keep, but I need you to understand this isn't just about justice or doing right. It's about you. It's been about you since you stood up to Pike that first night." Nora's carefully constructed world tilted. The vow she'd made in grief and certainty suddenly seemed like a prison of her own making. Here was a good man offering not demands, but simple truth, and she didn't know how to respond without betraying everything she'd built her life around. Before she could speak, Jake burst through the door. "Riders coming! Lots of them!" They prepared for another fight, but the approaching group carried torches and lanterns, townspeople. Not a posse. Maria led them, along with the widow Martinez, several railroad workers, and even some of the German farmers from the valley. "We've come to bring you home," Maria announced. "All of you." "It's not safe," Nora protested. "Pike." "Pike's busy explaining to Judge Coleman why there's kerosene on his boots." The widow Martinez interrupted with grim satisfaction. "And why his foreman was seen near the clinic just before the fire. Seems folks got tired of being scared," one of the railroad men added. Started talking. "Judge wants to hear your side proper-like, with the whole town watching." Nora looked at Elias, seeing her own surprise mirrored there. The people she'd healed, the lives she'd touched, they were standing up at last. As they prepared to leave the shack, Elias caught her arm gently. "What I said before—" "I know." She covered his hand with hers briefly. "When this is over, when I can think clearly, we'll talk. Properly." It wasn't a promise. Not exactly. But it was an acknowledgement that something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be ignored or wished away. The ride back to town under clearing stars felt like a strange reversal, from hunted to protected, from isolation to community. Nora held Rosa's baby, now peacefully sleeping, and allowed herself a moment of hope. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, surrounded by those she'd healed and the man who'd walked through literal fire for her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of home. The week before the hearing, Elias moved through Ash Creek like a man with quiet purpose. He didn't make speeches or threats, didn't pound on doors demanding justice. Instead, he simply talked over fence posts with ranchers, at the general store with housewives, in the saloon with cowboys and miners. His message was consistent. Remember who Nora Bellamy had helped, and consider who wanted her gone. In the evenings, he returned to the temporary clinic they'd established in an empty storefront, where Nora continued treating patients despite everything. She'd watch him through the window, noting the weariness in his shoulders, the determination in his stride. "You should rest," she told him one night as he helped her organize medical supplies donated by supporters. "Can't rest when there's work to be done," he replied, but accepted the cup of coffee she offered. They worked in companionable silence, the space between them filled with unspoken understanding. Since that night in the line shack, they'd maintained a careful balance, closer than before, but not quite crossing the line both sensed was there. 17, Elias said suddenly. "Pardon?" 17 people willing to testify tomorrow, about you treating them, about seeing you here the night William Pike died. He pulled out a folded paper covered in signatures. "Maria helped gather these names, dates, what you did for each of them." Nora took the paper with trembling hands. She recognized every name: Jose with his broken arm, Mrs. Schmidt, who'd hemorrhaged after childbirth, the Patterson twins with scarlet fever, line after line of people she'd helped, now standing up for her. "The Hendersons signed," she said, surprised. "But they're Pike's neighbors." "Their daughter had lockjaw last month. You saved her when Doc Holcomb said there was no hope." Elias leaned against the counter. "Turns out gratitude runs deeper than fear, given the chance." A knock interrupted them. Young Father Miguel entered, the Catholic priest who served the Mexican community. Behind him came Reverend Thornton from the Protestant church, two men who rarely agreed on anything. "Miss Bellamy," Father Miguel began, "we've come to offer our support. Both of us will testify to your character tomorrow, and to the medical knowledge you've shared freely." Reverend Thornton added, "Teaching our midwives better birthing practices, showing mothers how to prevent milk fever. That knowledge has saved lives." After they left, Nora sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "I never expected—" "You never expected folks to remember kindness." Elias moved closer. "You underestimate yourself, and them." She looked up at him, this man who'd spent days building her defense while asking nothing in return. "Why are you doing this, really?" He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled up a chair beside her. "My wife, Catherine, she was gentle, quiet, never liked confrontation. When she got sick after losing the baby, she just accepted it, said it was God's will." His voice roughened. "I watched her fade away, too proper to fight, too resigned to rage against it." Nora waited, sensing the weight of what he was sharing. "Then you arrived," he continued. "Fighting everything Pike, tradition, the whole blessed town if need be, saving lives with your bare hands and sheer will." He met her eyes. "You're nothing like her, and that's what I needed to see. That fighting death isn't blasphemy, that standing up to wrong isn't improper, that strength in a woman isn't something to fear." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. "Elias!" "I'm not asking you to break your vow," he said quickly. "I know what promises made in grief mean. God knows I've made my own. But I need you to know whatever happens tomorrow. Whoever you choose to be after, I'm grateful you came here. Grateful I got to know you." The space between them hummed with possibility. Nora found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by something stronger than propriety or promises. But footsteps outside broke the moment, and Jake entered with more signatures. The night before the hearing, Nora couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, medical bag packed in case she needed to flee, testimony prepared but feeling inadequate. A soft knock made her freeze. "It's me." Elias's voice came through the door. "Brought something." She opened it to find him holding a worn leather journal. "This was Catherine's," he said, offering it. "Her diary from our first year here. Thought you should read the marked pages." Alone again? Nora opened the journal with careful hands. Catherine Hart's writing was delicate, proper, but her words carried unexpected steel. "E says I shouldn't treat the Mexican children, that it will upset the neighbors. But how can I turn away sick babies? I've been sneaking medicines to their mothers, teaching them what little I know." Asterisk. And later, "The doctor refuses to come for Maria's birth. Says her kind breed too much anyway. I'll go myself. E will be angry, but some things matter more than propriety." Asterisk. Page after page revealed a woman who'd quietly rebelled in her own way, who'd chosen compassion over convention. The final marked entry was dated just days before her death. "I'm frightened, but not of dying. I'm frightened I haven't done enough, haven't been brave enough. If God grants me more time, I'll be bolder. I'll stop hiding my work. E deserves a wife who stands in the light, not the shadows." Asterisk. Nora closed the journal, tears on her cheeks. Catherine Hart hadn't been weak or resigned. She'd been another woman trying to heal in a hard world, limited by her time and circumstances, but fighting nonetheless. A folded paper fell from the back cover. Elias's handwriting. Recent. "She would have admired you, would have wanted me to tell you that. Whatever tomorrow brings. Know that you're finishing work she started. That's why the women trust you. They remember her kindness. See her courage made complete in you." Asterisk. The hearing dawned clear and hot. The town hall overflowed, people standing along the walls and spilling onto the porch. Judge Coleman presided from a makeshift bench, his expression grave. Pike sat with his lawyer from Denver, confident despite the murmurs when people saw the kerosene stains still visible on his boots. Dorsey fidgeted beside them. Deputy Starr, notably absent Sheriff Morrison, had suspended him pending investigation. "This is a hearing to determine if charges should be filed against Miss Nora Bellamy," Judge Coleman began. "We'll proceed with order and dignity." Pike's lawyer stood first, smooth and city-polished. He painted Nora as a dangerous radical, a woman who'd violated medical ethics and social order. He produced witnesses, all Pike's employees, who swore they'd seen her at the ranch that night. Then Elias rose, not as a lawyer, but as a man who knew these people, who'd earned their respect through years of fair dealing. "Your Honor, we have 17 citizens willing to testify that Miss Bellamy was here in town that night, delivering a baby and treating patients." One by one, they came forward. Maria, head high despite Pike's glares. The widow Martinez, sharp-tongued and unafraid. The Protestant and Catholic ministers together. Cowboys, farmers, mothers, laborers, a cross-section of Ash Creek that surprised even Nora. But it was little Miguel who provided the turning point. The boy whose life Nora had saved that first night walked to the front, no longer fever-weak, but strong and clear-eyed. "Señorita Nora saved me when everyone else wanted me to die," he said in careful English. "She took off the bad sign and made me well. That's all I know." The room went silent. Even Pike had no answer to a child's simple truth. Judge Coleman called a recess. When he returned, his judgment was swift. "No charges will be filed against Miss Bellamy. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the clinic fire and false witness statements." The room erupted. Some cheered, others muttered, but the tide had clearly turned. Pike stormed out, his empire of fear cracking at the foundations. In the chaos, Nora found herself pulled into embrace after embrace patients, supporters, people she'd never even treated but who'd been moved by the testimony. When she finally broke free, she found Elias waiting by the door. "Walk with me," he asked. They strolled toward the cemetery, past Catherine's simple headstone. Elias touched it gently. A greeting and farewell both. She was braver than you knew. Nora said, I'm learning that about a lot of people. He turned to her. Including myself. Thought I was done with courage when she died. Thought it was safer to just exist. And now I think maybe she was trying to tell me something. Through her diary. Through sending you here. He stepped closer. I know you have your vow. Nora, I respect that, but I need to say this once. Clear, I love you. Not as a replacement for her, not as some delicate thing to protect, but as the woman who fights fires and prejudice and death itself. Nora's breath caught, the wall around her heart, already cracked, threatened to crumble entirely. Elias, You don't have to answer, not today, but someday, when you're ready. I'll be here, building that clinic on my land if you'll let me. Being your friend if that's all you can offer. Just let me hope. She reached up, touched his face gently. You already are my friend. The best I've found here. As for the rest... She thought of Catherine's words about standing in the light. Ask me again when the clinic is built. When Pike's influence is broken. When I can think beyond the next crisis. That's more than I dared hope for. They walked back toward town together. Toward the temporary clinic where patients waited. Toward a future neither had imagined, but both were beginning to believe possible. The fight wasn't over. Pike would regroup. There would be other challenges. But today, Ash Creek had chosen healing over hate, courage over fear, and two damaged souls had found in each other not just alliance, but the possibility of something deeper, something worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth believing in despite all the reasons not to. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning shadows. It was time to get back to work. The shot came from the rocks above the creek, catching Elias just below the ribs as he watered his horse. He dropped to one knee, hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. The shooter had vanished like smoke, leaving only echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. Jake found him an hour later, barely conscious and trying to staunch the flow with his neckerchief. The ride back to the ranch was agony, each jolt of the horse sending fire through his body. Get Miss Nora, Elias gasped as they reached the yard. Only her. But Nora was already running from the temporary clinic, medical bag in hand. She'd heard the commotion, seen the blood on Jake's shirt. Her face went white when she saw Elias, but her hands remained steady. Inside, on the table, now. They carried him to the kitchen, cleared the heavy wooden table with one sweep. Nora cut away his shirt with scissors, revealing the wound a neat hole still weeping red. Powder burns on the skin, close range, deliberate. The bullet's still in there, she said, pressing around the wound. Elias groaned. Deep, near the liver. Maybe nicked it. Can you, Jake started. Get out, all of you. Her voice brooked no argument. Boil water. Find clean sheets. Send someone for my surgical kit from the clinic. Move. Alone with Elias. She allowed herself one moment of fear. His face was gray, breath coming shallow. The wound was bad, worse than she'd let on. Without proper tools. Without assistance. Hey, he whispered, eyes finding hers. You've got that look. What look? The one that says you're calculating odds. He tried to smile. Failed. Don't like my chances. Stop talking. She began cleaning the wound site, hands moving automatically through procedures she'd done dozens of times, but never on someone who mattered this much, never with her heart hammering against her ribs. Jake returned with the surgical kit. Maria followed with boiled water, clean cloths. Nora sent them away again, needing space, needing to focus without their worried eyes. She washed her hands with carbolic, laid out her instruments, scalpel, probe, forceps. The bullet had to come out, leaving it meant certain infection, likely death. But digging for it could cause hemorrhaging, could nick vital organs. Nora, Elias's voice was weaker now. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. She prepared a dose of laudanum. "Drink this." "Need to say, later. You can tell me later." She helped him drink, waited for his eyes to glaze. "I'm going to save you, Elias Hart, because I'm stubborn. Remember, too stubborn to let you die on my watch." The surgery became a meditation, a prayer. She expanded the wound carefully, blood welling despite her attempts to control it. The probe went deep, searching. There a scrape of metal on metal. The bullet had lodged against a rib, miraculous inches from his liver. Sweat dripped down her back as she worked the forceps into position. One wrong move could tear the intercostal artery. One slip could. Got it. The bullet came free. A mushroomed piece of lead that she dropped into a basin with a clatter. Now the real work, checking for bone fragments. Ensuring no major vessels were damaged. Cleaning the wound channel. Time ceased to exist. There was only the work suture the bleeders. Irrigate with boiled water. Check and double check. Her back screamed from bending over the table. But she didn't pause until the last stitch was placed. Elias's breathing had steadied. Color returned slowly to his face. The immediate danger had passed. But infection could still claim him. Would likely claim him. If statistics held true. She covered him with clean blankets, pulled a chair close to monitor his pulse. Only then did she notice her hands shaking, the blood on her apron, the tears she didn't remember shedding. "Maria," she called, voice hoarse. "I need your help moving him to a bed." They transferred him carefully to the downstairs room that had been his father's. Nora set up her vigil basin of water, clean cloths, medicines arranged within reach. She'd stay until the crisis passed, however long that took. Night fell. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering incoherently. Fever rose despite her efforts, and she bathed his face and chest repeatedly, trying to cool the fire in his blood. "Catherine," he mumbled once, reaching out. Nora caught his hand. "She's not here. It's me, Nora." His eyes opened briefly, focused. "Nora, you stayed." "Where else would I be?" "Your vow." "Hush." She squeezed his hand. "Rest now." Through the long hours, she fought for him. When his fever spiked dangerously, she packed him in wet sheets. When he thrashed, threatening to tear his stitches, she held him down with strength born of desperation. When infection tried to take hold, she cleaned the wound obsessively, applied poultices of bread and milk to draw out the poison. "Somewhere in the darkest part of night," he whispered, "not ready to die." "Good," she whispered back, "because I'm not ready to let you." Dawn came gray and uncertain. Elias's fever had broken, but he remained dangerously weak. Nora hadn't left his side, hadn't slept. She looked like a ghost herself, hair unpinned, dress stained with blood and sweat. Jake peered in. "Miss Nora, you need rest. Maria can watch." "No." The word came out harsher than intended. "I stay until he's out of danger." "That could be days." "Then I stay for days." It was more than medical duty driving her now. Somewhere between the surgery and the fever fighting, between his hand in hers and her name on his lips. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The vow she'd made to God felt distant, abstract, compared to the very real man fighting for life in this bed. On the second night, infection tried one more assault. The wound went hot and red, drainage turning cloudy. Nora worked frantically hot compresses to draw out infection, carbolic washes, prayers she hadn't spoken since James died. "Please," she whispered, not sure if she addressed God or Elias or the universe itself. "I've lost enough. Don't take him too." Whether from divine intervention or sheer medical persistence, the infection retreated. By the third morning, Elias woke clear-eyed and hungry, sure signs of recovery. "You look terrible," were his first coherent words. Nora laughed, actually laughed for the first time in days. "You're one to talk." "How long?" 3 days. You were shot below the ribs, close range. The bullet lodged against bone. She checked his bandages with professional efficiency, trying to hide how her hands trembled with relief. "You're lucky." "Not luck." He caught her hand. Just you." The intimacy of the moment, his hand on hers, the acknowledgement of what had passed between them during those dark hours made her breath catch. "Elias, I remember bits. You talking to me, fighting for me." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "No one's ever fought for me like that. You fought for me first. The fire, the hearing, everything since." "That's different." "Is it?" They looked at each other, really looked. She saw in his eyes what she felt in her chest. Something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, burned away by fever and fear. "I need to check your sutures," she said, but didn't pull her hand away. "Nora." His voice was soft, serious. "What happens now?" She thought of her vow, made in grief over another man's deathbed. Thought of the life she'd built around that promise, solitary, dedicated, safe from the pain of loss. Then she looked at Elias, alive because she'd refused to let him go, and knew the truth. She'd already broken that vow in every way that mattered. Her heart was no longer her own to withhold. "Now," she said quietly, "you heal. We find who shot you. And then," she took a breath, stepped off the cliff. "Then we talk about building that clinic on your land, about partnerships, about possibilities I've been too frightened to consider." Hope bloomed in his eyes. "That sounds like a plan worth healing for." She smiled, finally releasing his hand to continue her examination. The wound was clean, healing well. He'd carry a scar, but he'd live. They both would. Outside, Jake was organizing increased security. Word of the shooting had spread, and while no one could prove Pike's involvement, everyone knew. The war wasn't over, but here in this room, with sunlight streaming through windows and Elias's steady breathing filling the space, Nora felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of a future that included more than just duty and dedication. She'd come to Ash Creek to heal others. She hadn't expected to find healing for herself. "Rest," she told Elias, pulling the blanket higher. "I'll be right here." "I know," he said, eyes already closing. "That's why I can rest." She settled back in her chair, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. Her last thought before sleep took her was a revelation. Love wasn't a betrayal of her calling. It was an extension of it. To heal, to fight death, to refuse to let go. These were all forms of love. And maybe, just maybe, that was what her vow had always truly meant. The market square filled early that morning, transformed into an open-air courtroom. Tables had been arranged in a horseshoe, with Judge Coleman presiding from the center. The entire town seemed to have gathered: ranchers, farmers, townspeople, Mexican laborers, even some Apache traders from the hills. Word had spread that this would be the final reckoning between Pike and those who opposed him. Nora stood near the witness area, her medical bag at her feet, patient logs in her arms. Beside her, Elias sat carefully in a chair Jake had brought, still pale from his wound, but insisting on attending. She'd tried to convince him to stay at the ranch, but his jaw had set in that way she'd come to recognize meant arguing was futile. "This is my fight, too," he'd said simply. Now, watching Pike swagger in with 2 lawyers from Denver, she was glad for Elias's steady presence. Pike's confidence seemed unshaken despite the mounting evidence against him: the kerosene on his boots, witness testimonies about threats, suspicious financial dealings with town officials. Judge Coleman called for order. "We're here to address multiple charges: arson, attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, and falsification of official documents. Mr. Pike, how do you plead?" "Not guilty to all charges," Pike declared. "This is a witch hunt, orchestrated by that woman," he pointed at Nora, "and her radical supporters." The morning progressed with testimony after testimony. Jake described finding the kerosene can. Sheriff Morrison, who'd replaced the corrupt Dorsey, presented evidence of forged documents. But it was clear Pike's lawyers were skilled, casting doubt on each piece of evidence, suggesting alternative explanations. Then Reverend Thornton stood. "I have something to present, Your Honor." He pulled out a letter, hands shaking slightly. "This arrived yesterday from Dr. Holcomb. He's in Colorado now, dying of consumption. Says he wants to clear his conscience." The letter was damning. Holcomb confessed to botching William Pike Jr. His treatment while intoxicated, admitted Pike had paid him to disappear, and confirmed he'd seen Pike near the clinic the night of the fire. "Hearsay," Pike's lawyer objected. "A letter from a drunk doctor who's not here to be questioned." "Perhaps," Judge Coleman said, "but it corroborates other testimony." The real surprise came when Standing Dove's father, Chief Broken Wing, requested to speak. The old Apache leader rarely came to town, and his presence caused a stir. "The white doctor saved my daughter and grandson," he said through an interpreter. "This man," he pointed at Pike, "tried to poison the water where my people camp, make us sick so we would leave. We have proof." He produced glass vials, carefully labeled. Water samples, tested by the teacher at the mission school. Arsenic, same poison found in Pike's storehouse. The crowd erupted. Poisoning water sources was beyond the pale, even for those who distrusted the Apache. It spoke to a cruelty that shocked even Pike's supporters. Pike's face had grown increasingly red as the morning progressed. "Finally," he exploded. "You're going to take the word of savages and Mexicans over mine. I built this town, I brought prosperity." "You brought fear," Maria said, standing despite not being called. "My husband died in your mine because you wouldn't shore up the tunnels. Called it too expensive. My son lost his hand in your mill," another woman added. "You threw him out without a penny, said it was his fault for being careless." One by one, people stood, sharing grievances long suppressed. The dam of fear Pike had built was crumbling, releasing years of accumulated resentment. Judge Coleman gavelled for order repeatedly. When quiet finally returned, he looked grave. "Mr. Pike, the evidence is overwhelming. Beyond the current charges, I'm seeing patterns of exploitation and endangerment that warrant further investigation." You can't do this," Pike snarled. "I own half this town. I employ most of these ingrates." "Which is precisely the problem." The judge replied, "Your wealth has allowed you to operate above the law for too long." The final testimony came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Jameson, the elderly widow who owned the building where Nora's first clinic had stood, shuffled forward. "I have something to say," she announced in her quavering voice. "Mr. Pike came to me before the fire, offered to buy my building for 3 times its worth. When I asked why, he said it would burn down soon anyway, and wouldn't I rather have the money?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Pike had been so confident of the fire. He'd tried to profit from it. "That's a lie," Pike roared. But his lawyers were already packing their papers, recognizing a lost cause. Judge Coleman's verdict was swift and comprehensive. Pike was arrested on multiple charges, his assets frozen pending investigation. His reign over Ash Creek effectively ended as the sheriff led him away. Pike's eyes found Nora. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You've ruined everything." "No," she replied calmly. "I just healed what you broke." The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in excited clusters. Justice had been served, but more importantly, fear had been conquered. Ash Creek could begin healing from years of Pike's tyranny. Later, at the ranch, Nora checked Elias's wound. He'd overexerted himself at the hearing, and fresh blood spotted his bandages. "You should have stayed here," she scolded, cleaning the area gently. "And miss seeing Pike finally face justice, not a chance." He winced as she applied fresh dressing. "Besides, I wanted to be there when you won." "We won. All of us." "Maybe, but you started it. That first night, taking off that quarantine sign, you showed people courage was possible." She finished with the bandages, but didn't move away immediately. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting golden light across his face. Without the immediate crisis, without Pike's threat hanging over them, she felt suddenly aware of their proximity, of possibilities now open.
"Elias,"
she began, then stopped, uncertain how to proceed. "I know," he said softly. "Everything's changed now. The question is, what do we do about it?" She thought of her vow, that promise made in grief that had shaped her life for 3 years. Then she thought of the past weeks fighting for this town, for these people. For him? Somewhere along the way, that rigid promise had transformed into something broader, more encompassing. "I made a promise once," she said slowly, "to dedicate my life to healing. I thought that meant standing alone, belonging to no one but God and my calling." She met his eyes. "But I've learned something here. Healing isn't just about medicine. It's about community, connection, fighting for what's right, and maybe it's about allowing yourself to be healed too." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when you asked me to wait until the clinic was built, until Pike was dealt with." She took a breath. "Well, Pike's gone, and I've been thinking about where to build that clinic. And your land makes sense. Central location, good water, protection from the elements." She paused, gathered courage. "And it would be convenient, having the clinic so close to home." The word hung between them, laden with possibility. Elias reached up, touched her face with gentle fingers. "Is that what you want, a home here with me?" Instead of answering directly, she told him about Catherine's diary, about the woman who'd fought quietly for healing in her own way, about understanding that love and calling weren't opposites, but could be woven together into something stronger than either alone. "Your wife understood something I'm just learning," Nora finished. "That the heart has room for both duty and love, that maybe they're meant to support each other." "Catherine would have liked you," Elias said. "Would have been glad to know her work continued." "I'd like to think so." Nora covered his hand with hers. "I can't promise to be a traditional wife. I'll always be running to emergencies, always putting patients first sometimes. I'm not asking for traditional, I'm asking for you, exactly as you are." His thumb brushed her cheek. "The woman who performs surgery on kitchen tables and stands up to bullies and refuses to let people die on her watch. That woman is also scared." She admitted, I've kept my heart locked away for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to open it." "We'll figure it out together, if you're willing to try." The setting sun painted the room in warm hues. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of ranch life horses, chickens, Jake calling to the hands. But inside this room, time seemed suspended, waiting for her answer. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm willing to try." His smile was like sunrise after a long night, when he drew her down for a kiss gentle. Mindful of his injury, she felt the last of her walls crumble. Not in defeat, but in recognition that some barriers were meant to fall, making room for something better to grow. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "So," Elias said, grin turning mischievous, "about that clinic, I'm thinking adobe walls, proper surgery room, maybe quarters attached for the doctor." "Quarters for the doctor and her husband," Nora corrected, surprising herself with the ease of saying it. I like the sound of that. So did she, more than she'd thought possible. The future stretched before them, not without challenges. Certainly, there would be patients to treat, a town to continue healing, a life to build together. But for the first time in 3 years, that future felt full of light rather than duty alone. The vow she'd made hadn't been broken. She realized it had been transformed, expanded to include not just the healing of others, but the healing of her own heart. And that, perhaps, had been God's plan all along. 6 months later, the new clinic stood complete on Hart Ranch land, adobe walls thick enough to withstand fire, proper surgical room with real operating table, and attached quarters where Nora had made her home. A hand-carved sign hung by the door, "Healing without judgment." The words etched deep into mesquite wood by Elias's own hands. The morning sun cast long shadows as Nora organized her medicines, everything neat and properly labeled. Through the window, she could see Ash Creek spreading below, smoke rising peacefully from chimneys, the town slowly healing from its years under Pike's shadow. Coffee. Elias appeared in the doorway, connecting the clinic to their living quarters, 2 steaming cups in hand. His shirt was already dusty from morning chores, but his eyes were bright with the contentment that had replaced old grief. "Bless you," Nora said, accepting the cup gratefully. Their fingers brushed, and even after 3 months of marriage, that simple touch still sent warmth through her. The wedding had been small, held beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. Father Miguel and Reverend Thornton had performed the ceremony together, a first for Ash Creek, but fitting for a union that had already broken so many conventions. Nora had worn her mother's dress, altered by Maria's skilled hands, and wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. "I have 2 promises to make," she'd said during the ceremony, surprising everyone by speaking her own vows. "First, to love and honor this man who showed me that strength comes in many forms, including the courage to trust again. Second, to continue serving this community with healing hands and an open heart, knowing that love multiplies rather than divides our capacity to care." Now, watching Elias check the horse he'd been training for the doctor's rounds, she smiled at how naturally their lives had woven together. He supported her work without question, often accompanying her on distant calls, standing guard while she delivered babies or set bones. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Nora, Mrs. Hart." Young Miguel stood at the door, no longer the fevered child from that first night, but a healthy boy of 11. "Mama says to come quick. The baby's coming." "Tell her I'll be right there." Nora grabbed her birthing kit, already packed and ready. "Elias, I'm going to Maria's." "Want company?" he called back. "Always." They rode together toward town, Nora side-saddle but confident, medical bag secured behind her. The path was familiar now, worn by countless trips between ranch and town. People waved as they passed the German farmers, the railroad workers, even Mrs. Jameson in her rocker. Maria's labor progressed smoothly, Nora coaching her through each contraction while Elias waited outside with the other men, passing around coffee and quiet conversation. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air strong and healthy, a cheer went up from the yard. "A girl," Nora announced, carrying the wrapped infant out for the father to see. Perfect in every way. "What will you name her?" someone asked. Maria's husband smiled shyly. "Esperanza Nora, for hope, and for the one who brings it." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. In the past months, 3 babies had been named for her, an honor that moved her more than any formal recognition could. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Morrison approached. "Mrs. Hart, thought you should know. Got a letter from the territorial governor. They're so impressed with how our town handled the Pike situation. They're sending funds to establish a proper hospital. Want you to head it up, if you're willing." A real hospital. Nora's mind raced with possibilities. Proper beds, surgical equipment, maybe even trained nurses to help. "Think about it," Morrison said. No rush to decide. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in thought. Finally, Elias spoke. A hospital would mean more time away, more responsibilities. "Yes," Nora agreed. "But also more lives saved, more people trained. The work could continue even if something happened to me." "Nothing's going to happen to you," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." She smiled at his protective tone, but her practical nature asserted itself. "We both know that's not a promise anyone can make. But a hospital, that's a legacy that lasts." They'd reached the clinic. As Elias helped her dismount, his hands lingered on her waist. "You'll do it. Won't you take the position?" Only if you're certain. This affects both of us now. Nora. He cupped her face gently. I knew who I was marrying. A woman who can't turn away from need, who fights death with her bare hands. I'd never ask you to be less than you are. Even if it means late nights, emergencies during supper, me coming home covered in... He silenced her with a kiss. Even then, especially then, your dedication is part of what I love. A commotion in the distance caught their attention. A wagon approached fast, dust billowing. As it drew closer, Nora recognized the driver, a homesteader from the valley. Please, the man called out. My wife, she's bleeding bad. The baby won't come right. Without hesitation, Nora was moving. Bring her inside. Elias, I need hot water, all the clean linens we have. The next hours blurred into focused intensity. The baby was breech, the mother exhausted from hours of fruitless labor. Nora worked with steady hands, turning the infant carefully, monitoring the mother's failing strength. I need you to push when I say, she instructed. Elias, support her shoulders. He moved without question, strong and steady, anticipating her needs. Together they worked doctor and rancher, wife and husband, partners in the most fundamental way. When the baby finally emerged, blue-tinged but breathing, Nora cleared its airways, rubbed warmth into tiny limbs until a cry erupted. The mother sobbed with relief, reaching for her child. You saved them both, the father said, tears streaming down his weathered face. How can we ever repay? By raising that child with love. Nora interrupted gently. That's payment enough. Later, after the family had gone, Nora and Elias stood outside watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and rose. She leaned against him, exhausted but satisfied. That's the future, she said quietly. Training others to do what I do, building something that lasts beyond one person. Then we'll build it, Elias said simply. Whatever you need. She turned in his arms, studying his face. The lines around his eyes had deepened, but they were laugh lines now, not just marks of old sorrow. Do you ever regret it marrying a woman who puts her calling first sometimes? Do you ever regret marrying a rancher who smells like horses and cattle? Never, she said firmly. Then you have your answer. He pulled her closer. We both brought our whole selves to this marriage you're calling, my ranch, our pasts and hopes. That's what makes it work. A cry from inside interrupted, not urgent, just someone needing attention. Nora sighed but smiled. Duty calls. It always will, Elias agreed. Good thing I knew that when I fell in love with you. As she moved to answer the call, Nora paused at the door. The sign caught her eye, healing without judgment. It had started as a statement of medical ethics, but it had become more. It was how they loved each other, how they were building their life together. Inside, she found not a medical emergency but Maria's sister, bringing dinner and news that the town council had voted unanimously to accept the hospital funds. The future was taking shape, bright with possibility. That night, as Nora updated her patient log by lamplight, Elias worked beside her on ranch accounts. The comfortable silence between them spoke of partnership deeper than words. Outside, coyotes called across the desert, and somewhere a baby cried, quickly soothed. I've been thinking, Nora said suddenly, about children. Elias's pen stilled. They hadn't discussed this, both perhaps afraid to hope after their respective losses. And his voice was carefully neutral. I want them, when the time is right, after the hospital is established. She met his eyes. Children who grow up seeing both parents serve others, who understand that love and duty can strengthen each other. The joy that bloomed across his face was answer enough. Catherine would have wanted that too, he said softly. Children raised in love, not fear. Then we're agreed. She returned to her writing, but her smile lingered. Though I pity any child who tries to get away with claiming illness to skip chores, their mother will know better. Elias laughed, the sound rich and full. God help them indeed. As the lamp burned low, they prepared for bed, another day done, another tomorrow waiting. The clinic stood ready for whatever emergencies the night might bring. The town below slept more peacefully than it had in years. And in the simple adobe house attached to the healing place, two people who'd thought their chances at love were buried with their pasts discovered that sometimes the greatest miracle is a second chance at happiness. The desert stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging. But beneath them, in Ash Creek, change continued slow, steady, healing. And at the heart of it, a woman who'd learned that the strongest medicine isn't always found in a bottle. And a man who'd discovered that new love doesn't diminish old love, but honors it by living fully again. Together, they would build that hospital. Together, they would raise children. Together, they would face whatever the frontier threw at them. Because that's what love does. It heals, it hopes, and it endures. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American West? Please share your thoughts and location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss this journey of healing and love in Old Ash Creek. If you enjoyed Nora and Elias's story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover this tale of courage, compassion, and second chances in the frontier. Your support means the world and helps us bring more authentic Western stories to life.